Perfect. Good morning, Bruno.
Hey Nick, how are you?
I'm good and you.
Awesome. It's great to be on. It's great to be on again. It's so good. I know that we missed last week, but we're back. We've been quite busy with court. But yeah, so you've got a question for me around student accommodation.
Yes, perfect. So we're going to continue our student accommodation theme that we've been going over for the last couple of weeks. And this time we're going to change it up a little bit. And one of the questions that we've been asked now is, what are the things that someone should consider when entering into a business in respect of student accommodation? So for those people who are maybe thinking about buying a property, using it as a student accommodation, maybe what are the things that someone considers from the business side before entering into that transaction?
So what is the first thing to consider when entering into the student accommodation business? Now, structuring has been a word that's been thrown around a lot over the last couple of years, and it's quite a broad term. What does structuring actually mean? Well, structuring can refer to a number of different things. And when you're looking at it from a business perspective, you can even define it as the internal structuring of the actual business owner. You can look at it as the internal structuring of the business owner, shareholder relationships, and then obviously you can look at it as structuring of relationships with outside parties. Now, there's a whole range of different topics around structuring. But where I like to focus on is particularly on the legal and tax side of structuring. And so here we focus on three core elements. It's your asset protection, it's your tax efficiency, and it's your financing optimization. Now, I can spend hours delving into these and going into explanations on how they work. But in short, what you're really trying to do is you're trying to find a balance between the three of these things as a business. You need a balance. Now, asset protection is clearly one of the most important ones, and this is where you're trying to differentiate and create a barrier between your business and yourself to make sure that if something goes wrong on one side of either the business or your personal life, that you're actually able to avoid risk. Tax efficiency, what does that mean? Well, obviously, people don't want to pay unnecessary tax. So you have to pay tax. That's not something you can escape from. But you are allowed to structure your affairs in order to make it as efficient as possible. And lastly is financing optimization. Now, very few people actually understand what this means. But remember, as a business, very often you're going to need some kind of money, right? Now, either you're going to use your own money, but that's still money. That's still a capital investment into the business. It's either your own money, maybe you borrow money. Now, that's debt. That's again an investment into the business, but now you're acquiring this money through loans. The bottom line is most businesses need some form of capital. And even if you're sitting at home behind your laptop creating software, even there is going to be a capital outlay because at some point or another, that time that you're spending, that laptop that you're buying, that coffee that you're drinking, all has something to do with the money that you have to put in order to be able to have those resources. So these three components, most people need to find some kind of balance in. Now, when entering into a business, any business, I usually start with a conversation of please do not do it in your personal name. And for me, that is a general rule because that carries that opens you up to a huge amount of risk. Now, yes, you know what? If it's a small little idea, again, I use tech companies as an example. If it's an idea that you have in your head and you want to sit behind your laptop and just start working, sure. You know what? Don't go register a company just to start with an idea that might not go anywhere. But if you're going to invest in an asset, especially something like property, doing it in your personal name opens yourself up to huge costs later if you ever try and move this property, as an example, into a different entity, into a trust, into a company. So if you have the intention of actually running a business, please do it in a company. Start off doing it in a company. Make no other mistake, at least get this company registered and begin operations in the company. Now, how does this impact the asset protection? Well, now there's a barrier between you and the business. If something goes wrong on the business side, you as a shareholder are usually protected. So not all the time. There are situations where people can come after the directors and the shareholders, but for the most part, you will be protected. So that's great. That's tick box number one. You've got yourself at least some form of asset protection. Tax efficiency, look, depends what tax you're paying in your personal name. But remember, company, 27% tax rate. It's not that bad. So if a company makes money, pays 27%. And if you want to draw a salary, then you can also draw a salary and pay tax at your personal income tax rate. And finally, financing optimization. I can almost guarantee you that you will not be able to get proper funding, especially in the commercial space, without running the business through a company. I know, for example, when it comes to BE structures, you would ordinarily need a company. When it comes to commercial funding, they require that you actually register a company before applying for finance. So yes, for example, with a home loan, you'd get away doing it in your personal name. But with student accommodation specifically, because it's commercial in nature, more often than not, you will at least need a company. So the quickest advice I can give you is get a company. At least you tick all three boxes. And the best advice I can give you is don't do it in your personal name, because then you barely tick any one of those boxes. Remember, asset protection in your personal name doesn't exist. Everything's in your personal name, which means it's exposed. Your one property and your other property, everything in your personal name, is one thing goes wrong, everything collapses. Tax efficiency, look, there is some short-term tax efficiency, but remember, and I'll chat to you about this now when it comes to trust as an example, but from a tax efficiency perspective, you're building up your personal estate, which means that your income bracket, you're going to be paying more and more tax from an income perspective, and may even get up to the 45% mark. And in addition to that, if you pass away in your personal name, you've usually got a state duty to pay. Now, financing optimization in your personal name also. A lot of places don't want to give money to a person in their personal name. And if you're looking for an investor, not a shareholder, they're certainly not going to give money to you in your personal name, because they're going to want a company created that they can be a part of. So last thing I'm going to touch on is the idea of a trust. Now, I don't advise a trust for everyone, so please, this isn't a conversation of, oh, now everyone needs to have a trust. Not at all, right? There's a time and place. People with large values, so a high asset value, a high net asset value, would ordinarily benefit from a trust, especially persons that are getting a lot of income and want to keep this income safe in a trust. That's number one. Number two, people that are trying to leave a legacy for their family and have quite a large estate that they might want to leave to their family. Number two, those are typically the individuals. Now, remember, as an aspiring property investor, it's very difficult to get to a point later and try and move everything across. So for property investors, we normally say, consider the trust depending on what your aspirations are. And student accommodation, you know what, that's a big one because it's not cheap. A student accommodation property is quite expensive. So it is a time to consider whether involving a trust. Now, how would you involve a trust? Usually under these circumstances, you'd simply have the trust holding shares in the company. Like this, you don't have to really worry about anything else, the trust tax rate and all of that, because ultimately the company is the one running the business. But the upside of having a trust is your asset protection. Everything is out of your personal name. So not even the shares of the company are in your personal name anymore, and that limits exposure. Tax efficiency, as I mentioned before, if you pass away, that estate duty liability is not there anymore, provided that the trust is legitimate. And from a financing optimization perspective, you don't need to worry because your company's got that handled. So when entering into a business, keep these things in mind. It's important in all businesses, but student accommodation here specifically, it is quite important to at least be able to tick all those boxes.
Great. Thank you for that, Bruno.